This is one of the really encouraging and inspiring things to me about working in this missional space is, especially in Bible translation, kind of digital engagement, there have been a lot of tools that have been developed over time. A lot of times those tools are very powerful. They're also often hard to learn and use.
Right.
What has gradually been introduced recently is more of what people refer to as sort of vibe coding, where I have a sort of blank slate and I'm going to say, hey, create a project for me that is a web app for a software company that does this and that. It starts just creating those things out of nowhere.
Hi, my name is Joshua Seal, and I'm the Director of Global Missional AI. And welcome to our podcast. We're excited to have you here for this inaugural first episode. We plan on releasing these conversations on a weekly basis over the coming few months. Hit that subscribe button to stay connected. These conversations are ones you won't want to miss. Our guest today is Daniel Whitenack, CEO of Prediction Guard and co-host of the Practical AI Podcast. Daniel is also the founder of the Global Missional AI Summit, the community that brings together technologists, ministry leaders, and innovators who are shaping how AI serves the faith ecosystem. In today's episode, we'll explore what truly defines an AI agent versus automated workflows, the revolutionary concept of vibe coding that's transforming how developers build applications, and how Model Context Protocol, or MCP, is creating a universal language for AI tools to communicate. Daniel shares insights from the front lines of AI development, discusses how technologies are already accelerating Bible translation and digital engagement work, and offers practical advice for staying current on this rapidly evolving landscape. Whether you're a developer curious about AI agents, a ministry leader wondering how these tools might serve your mission, or simply fascinated by the intersection of faith and cutting-edge technology, this conversation will give you a clearer picture of where we're headed and how to navigate the opportunities ahead. I also wanted to mention that we're hosting a Global Missional AI Summit in London on July 17th. We're planning on having key leaders from across Europe and the Middle East join us for this event. Go to missional.ai to find out more and register. Lastly, this episode is brought to you in partnership with Glue, where faith meets technology. Glue is the technology platform connecting the faith ecosystem, serving over 100,000 leaders with value-aligned AI and ministry engagement tools that amplify impact. We're grateful for Glue for their partnership in making this podcast, as well as the Global Missional AI Summit, a reality. Go to glue.com to stay connected with them. Now on to the conversation.
Hi, I'm Daniel Whitenack. I'm CEO of Prediction Guard and co-host of the Practical AI Podcast.
Daniel, what is an AI agent?
Great question. I think especially because if you kind of search the internet or look on LinkedIn, you'll probably find as many definitions as times you look. For me, I think the difference is you can have an AI-driven system that has a pre-configured kind of workflow of processing, like, oh, I drop a file in this SharePoint folder, it's processed through a predefined set of steps, maybe calling LLMs at a certain point to reformat something, and then it pops out and I push something into a database. And that I think is an AI-driven workflow. Some people might call that an agent, but really the same thing happens every single time that you run the workflow.
Right.
I think the difference with AI agents is maybe twofold. One is that is more dynamic in the sense that generally an AI agent will have some sort of like routing or planning function in which the system will make a plan of what steps to execute on the fly and then execute those steps towards an outcome. Along the way, kind of the second defining feature might be access to a set of tools or functions or external systems that the planning could plan to use. So for example, I can have a target outcome of booking a car on Kayak, right? And the AI agent might have access to a tool that is the Kayak API, and then maybe some sort of financial API, my PayPal account or something, and then my email to get a confirmation or something like that. And it makes a plan. Okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to hit the API and try to do this, and then I'm going to check the email for the confirmation, and then I'm going to do that. But then in another case, I might just want to say, hey, remind me what the confirmation number is for my rental car booking.
Right.
And then in that case, it just goes to my email. It doesn't have to go back to the Kayak API. So it's dynamic each time it operates in that sense.
So it has more awareness of what the context of the user is, and it's making more decisions along the way. Would that be?
And it doesn't make sort of upfront assumptions necessarily as much, although you can kind of preload it with domain-specific information. Yeah.
Now, one of the places that we've seen these AI agents probably most active so far, anyway, in the true sense, the way you're describing them as opposed to AI automated processes, perhaps, is particularly in coding and in development.
Yep.
As you've been presenting here at Missional AI, I noticed Cursor perhaps running in your desktop there, and maybe some of these kind of AI tools. For people that are not yet familiar with what some of these AI coding agents are, can you just unpack for us why are they so interesting when it comes to development?
Yeah, so there's kind of been a progression. If you look at the history of this, for those that aren't familiar, most developers use what's called an IDE, which is essentially a text editor for code. That's traditionally how they've done this. Over time, those text editors have gradually introduced kind of not AI features always, but special features to do like autocomplete or to list out available functions or something like that. These kind of inbuilt things that are in your flow of programming. You're still programming, but they kind of help you. Gradually, things like GitHub Copilot, those have become more advanced and use kind of LLM-based models that will allow you to do more advanced things. Like I can write a comment in my code and say, create a function that pulls this out of the database and then outputs it to here or something. And it'll just write that function for me. That's all what I would consider kind of like code assistance. It's all kind of driven proactively by the developer. You're kind of still in that flow of development. Then what has gradually been introduced recently is more of what people refer to as sort of vibe coding, which is essentially these other tools like Cursor or Windsurf or All Hands, Replit, where the idea is I'm going to go in, I have a sort of blank slate, and I'm going to say, hey, create a project for me that is a web app for a software company that does this and that with this in the admin panel, and then you just starts just creating those things kind of out of nowhere. And if it doesn't work, you try it doesn't work, well, then you just try it again. You modify your prompt and like go again, and you just kind of do that prompting until you get something out that's working. And that's kind of the major shift that's happening in this kind of vibe coding piece.
So for those that aren't familiar, the vibe coding term comes from a tweet from Andrej Karpathy, who is one of the founders at Anthropic for a few weeks back. And he said something to the effect of, he thinks there's a new form of coding where you just give in to the vibes of the model and embrace exponentials, and you just don't think about the code even anymore. I mean, is that your experience now of development? Like how has this changed the way you're developing products?
Yeah, so I would say that for small kind of independent projects, like a good example is I had to create a financial model for my company to get investment, right? And it was super annoying to create that in Excel because of all of the various terms around how we do pilots and how things convert and like all of that stuff. So I'm like, I'm just going to put all this in and like create all the code to just make this financial model. And I want to be able to modify these parameters. And that worked great, right? It's kind of isolated thing that just kind of comes out. And you can, obviously I checked it and that sort of thing. It's I think, a slightly different prospect where you are in a larger organization where there's a large existing code base. Lots of context is needed. And the majority of development is kind of features or fixing bugs or this sort of thing. The vibe coding element, you're not creating things from scratch in that case. You are modifying an existing kind of large project. And I think that that's really where the tools are starting to get better, but there's where I find like the IDE based kind of suggestive things, at least for myself, are a little bit more useful at this point. But I think that will likely change in 3 months. So, depending on when this comes out, that might not be true.
Well, yeah. So viewer, if you're already watching and this is kind of making you feel like it's ancient history, we apologize in advance.
Yes.
But this stuff moves fast. I mean, I like the term vibe coding, and I'm beginning to think about it in a broader sense of how might the way of working with a model bring that kind of vibe working to other disciplines.
Yes.
Here at Missional AI, one of the examples you were sharing in your keynote this morning as we record was around how you're beginning to chain together some of these agents with this kind of vibe, I would call translation kind of way of working, thinking about things like Bible translation and some of these kind of other types of projects. Do you think that we can begin to apply these agentic models with this kind of vibe working kind of way of doing things to other disciplines that isn't just code? Yeah,
I actually do. And I think this is one of the really, I guess, encouraging and inspiring things to me about working in this missional space is the missional space, especially in Bible translation, kind of digital engagement. There have been a lot of tools that have been developed over time. A lot of times those tools are very powerful. They're also often kind of hard to learn and use, right? Just because they're powerful and there's a lot of options, there's a lot of knobs and levers, they're complicated interfaces, whatever. And so I think the prospect of putting those sorts of tools as things that can be called components or functions, however you want to think about them, behind a kind of orchestration layer really provides a way then for someone that's not as technical to say, oh, well, I need a custom thing that like pulls out all of these, paratext projects, which is, Bible translation software, combines them in this way, and then outputs kind of a report to here. And that sort of thing should be able to be orchestrated together in more of that kind of vibe coding way. I think that's dependent on some of those in the missional community creating the right interfaces to those systems such that they can be called by the agentic layer. But I think that will happen, and I've heard many people here at the conference already kind of talking in that vein. So
one of the challenges I think that we're seeing with the pace of change right now is just keeping up with it. I mean, as we record, we've had the Llama 4 models released on a Saturday afternoon. We were joking earlier, unhelpfully. I mean, but when we're at the point where for Meta to kind of get a PR win, they have to do a Saturday afternoon release just to kind of get a window is telling in terms of the pace of change. How are you and the team, kind of, I'd love you to talk more about kind of the company and what you guys are doing, but how are you thinking about just staying on top of this stuff? If you're a developer watching this, you can listen to podcasts, you can read the newsletters, you can do all the things, but is it just noise, or do you need to be on top of all these changes?
Yeah, so just to give some context, so Prediction Guard, the company that I'm the CEO of, we provide secure private infrastructure to run kind of a full Gen AI system privately for those in regulated industries with security sensitive use cases. And so a lot of these things for us, the way that it impacts is, Llama 4 is released over the weekend, and then our customers who are in control of what models that they're deploying immediately are messaging us and saying, hey, is it okay for us to deploy this? Can I run it in the system? Have you validated it? Right. So those things come pretty quick. What I would say, generally what I've seen and a good approach to this is, I think it is useful up to a point to keep up with all of those elements, but more from a learning curiosity standpoint. It's always going to take not a number of days, but months and even years for this to filter in kind of through an enterprise or into larger organizations. And naturally, within a couple months or however that is, a lot of that noise kind of filters out to things that survive. I think things, for example, like model context protocol and those sorts of things, everyone's talking about it right now. It seems that that's going to be kind of a thing that survives, but I don't know that we can really even say that that's at that stability point yet.
Again, that's 3 months at most that we've even been thinking about that?
Yes. Basically, the summary, I guess, of what I'm saying is don't feel stressed that if you're not keeping up on a daily basis, you're going to miss something. Those things that are important, maybe it is MCP, that's going to kind of survive the ups and downs and will be gradually integrated. There'll be more tooling around it, potentially all of those things. And you'll have the chance to get into it if you don't have time, right now.
I want to come back to the MCP thing because it's one of the things I'm really fascinated by, and I'm sure many watching this will only just begin to be thinking about it. But just to kind of stay on the point about choosing these models, keeping up to date with them, you guys are working with, as you say, companies and organizations that are having to deal with a lot of change, but often in regulated situations, and the decision making that has to go into choosing what provider to work with, what model to go with, what's stable, what's not. This seems to be a constant challenge. We've seen obviously in recent weeks DeepSeek coming and disrupting the market, people having a lot of questions about the provenance of those models. Meta obviously with the new models this week, Gemini just a couple of weeks ago with 2.5. How are you consulting with clients about which partners to choose in this place, and particularly in the context of our kind of Christian context here? Also, we're now beginning to see from people like Glue and others Christian models as well that are coming into the space. What goes into deciding which partner to even choose? I think one element of this is the relational element. So there are some kind of high trust partners in this space that I think would also be honest and willing to kind of meet with people and say, hey, well, this, whether it's Prediction Guard or Glue or whoever, they're going to try to provide their best effort of guidance and a sounding board for your situation. So I think get connected in the community, talk to people. That's going to be really helpful. What I will say generally from how we're consulting with people is what DeepSeek signals is not so much about DeepSeek, but it's about the trend towards this kind of proliferation of open models that will be at parity with closed models. So open models like a DeepSeek or Llama or whatever versus closed models like a Claude or OpenAI GPT models. Those will be at parity. And so what it means is there's going to be this kind of explosion of models, and there's really not as much differentiation or a moat necessarily kind of as a model builder, but more at the integration and the alignment and the data layer. Right.
And so what we usually suggest to people is make sure that you have optionality when it comes to models, because everything's going to be shifting. You will have to update models over time, even if it's just models from one generation of a model provider to another. You want to
3.5 being deprecated, or 4.5 being deprecated in the future.
So don't build your strategy around a model. Build your strategy around the types of AI workflows that you want to build, and then build in model optionality into that. And that includes kind of the ability to have some sort of kind of staging or test environment for new models, because you can't assume you just kind of swap out a model and you get similar behavior. You really want to put processes in place and code in place such that there's model optionality and this kind of testing process.
And so do you think that means that our longer term trend is people going to these kind of orchestration layers with model switching, things like Fireworks, OpenRouter, some of these kind of platforms?
Yeah, I think there's more standardization at the API layer. And so what I mean by that is pretty much all model providers are standardizing to an OpenAI-like API, including us. And so that means
documentation similar, structures similar,
exactly.
Calls.
And you can even have kind of swap out clients. So like our customers, they can use OpenAI's clients or the Vercel AI SDK or low code, no code tools like Langflow or Diffie on top of Prediction Guard, even though we're not OpenAI. We've just come into their specs, so you can kind of drop things on top of our platform and kind of have that portability.
So that optionality becomes more important. Let's talk about MCP then. So Model Context Protocol, this is a framework developed by Anthropic. It's now being widely adopted. People are seeing it show up in their IDEs, so things like Cursor and Windsurf, or directly in the app platforms for more consumer applications, so inside of Claude and I think soon ChatGPT. To put it into layman's terms, what is MCP? What's Model Context Protocol? So
if you think about this, I mean, there's been a couple of metaphors that have been used. The two that I've heard are USB-C. So like USB-C is kind of a universal cable connector protocol that allows you to connect, things from various manufacturers, charge things in like common ports in hotel rooms. A hotel room here I saw had a USB-C charger built into the wall. And so this is kind of a standard. The other would be kind of HTTP or HTML on the internet.
Okay.
We can use different browsers. We can open up web pages in different places. All of that communicates back and forth between web servers over a certain protocol that's expected. And so the kind of vision and hope of MCP is that this will be a protocol. It's really not an AI system. It is a kind of, in some ways, a boring, language or protocol that is set such that AI agents can speak a common language with other tools. So when we gave the example of like email, connecting to email or the Kayak API or your payment system, you could have an MCP server in front of that system. It communicates MCP back to the agents. And so they don't have to learn a special system for PayPal or a special system for Kayak. This is kind of a common protocol. And you'll see, even if you look up MCP servers online, there's kind of people starting to build these. There's big repositories, there's libraries. And so it is taking off very rapidly. And, before this, each of those were kind of ad hoc a little bit. People connected tools to AI systems, but it was always sort of a roll your own way of doing it.
But if you wanted to connect to an open source database system like Superbase, or you wanted to build a connection to a tool of some description like Notion, and you'd have to go through their APIs, you'd have to build the connections yourself.
Yes, you'd have to build the tool.
Right, but MCP kind of, it's this common language that the models understand.
It's like if you've already built the MCP server to connect to Notion, and assuming you've published that somewhere where I can use it, I can just use that MPC server and not have to figure out necessarily the API to Notion.
And so coming into our context here at Missional, what types of MCP servers are you thinking are going to begin to emerge for some of the tools that are out there in the world? What would that look like, where we've got AI agents using this technology to accelerate the types of workflows that the audience are going to be experiencing?
I think that there's kind of two categories. There's kind of special tools and MCP servers that might be kind of missional focused. And then there's kind of general purpose ones that certainly we will use that kind of are, I guess, common grace from the from the industry, like databases or other systems like Notion or that sort of thing. I'm sure that we can get use out of those. I think the ones that are special in the missional context that I would love to see and are things like, MCP server to paratext and paratext data in the case of Bible translation, in the case of like media to movements types of work. There's things like disciple tools and the Zoom training and those sorts of things that could have servers in front of them to help, tracking leads and seekers and follow-up. I think there's data sources and data analytics systems. So things like the Joshua Project or those sorts of things where there's a wealth of information that you can scroll through and look through, right? And there is an API for many of these types of, whether it's Joshua Project or Progress Bible or these different things. They may have an API, but again, you have to kind of custom build that if there's not that server in front. So those are kind of categories in my mind are kind of engagement tools, Bible translation tools, and then these like larger kind of data analytics or data platforms.
Yeah. So I want to kind of round out the conversation with kind of connecting what you're speaking about here and what I'm speaking about tomorrow, which is the agent kind of framework is emerging, and that's going to take care of a lot of the specialist tools and experiences that we need when we're building products with AI. But what about the people? What are the types of skills that you're beginning to look for? You're building a team. I think you said Prediction Guard, you're about 6 people now.
Correct, yeah.
As you guys scale up, you're raising money, you're building the company out. Do you foresee that the way that the industry is going is also going to change the type of people and skills that you're going to need to build a team?
Yeah, I definitely think it will have an impact. I think especially on the non-technical go-to-market side of things. there's a lot of kind of roles within there, like more of the SDR kind of lead generation stuff that I think will be handled quite nicely through, automated systems, depending on what domain you're in. We though have a very relational sale with our customers, and that relationship is important, and I think that will continue to be important. But the kind of lead and prioritization piece, and on the missional side, you could also think about that, right, in terms of digital engagement. I think people already, even before kind of the dawn of AI agents, are able to generate more leads for seekers into the systems than they have capacity for follow-up, right? So in some ways, I think it's more about how we better utilize those resources that we have versus getting rid of those positions, because in the case, again, of digital engagement, those people are capacity constrained. And, I've talked to people here this week who say, like, we would love to raise our ad spend, but our follow-up people can't handle the volume, right? And so if you can take some of those things that the follow-up people and the humans in the loop actually don't want to be doing, right? So they probably don't want to be creating reports. They probably don't want to be, spending 5 hours trying to pull this data that informs them about how to make this decision, or like remind themselves about what happened this time. So if you can do those kind of things around the periphery and really utilize them for the things that they actually want to be doing, that are the high value things, I think that's mostly how I'm thinking about it right now.
It's not about less humans involved, but it's less work that those humans don't want to do.
And that will enable a greater scale.
Right. Yeah. Which hopefully accelerates the whole mission. As we come into land, just talk to us about why this community is important to you. Missional AI is something that basically, I think I'm right in saying, was your idea originally.
Yes.
You're responsible for us all being here one way or another, although that's not your day job every day now. But what does it mean to you to bring together a community like this? Why is this important that we're doing it?
Yeah, I think way back in the day, sort of myself and Tim, who's involved in other work, we were running chatbot workshops around the world in various places, and we started realizing that, these people over here have learned something really cool, and that this group over here is having the same problem. Those people never talk to each other, right? And this is something really cool that I've learned about the missional space, is there's all of these super ambitious, very talented people working in silos, and kind of the systematic adoption of some of these things can be very difficult. So it's nice in that it's distributed in that way, and there's advantages to that, but there's also a need to bring things together. And so I'm really encouraged to see this kind of movement grow. I'm also really encouraged that there's legit people doing the event planning now, because I'm not an event planner. Now it's grown, and I think I see people, like, two things happening. One is where a lot of it was aspirational at the beginning. Now people actually have even years now of implementation and things into production. But there are also new people here that are just learning about this, and they're coming from industry, they're coming from academia, they're coming from nonprofits. And I think that's an important piece of this, is this broadening of involvement across these different sectors. And that's where a lot of the kind of magic can happen, I think, and the blessings from God, and in bringing those people together, and kind of, crossing those boundaries and bringing a real spirit of unity.
That's awesome. Daniel Whitenack, CEO of Prediction Guard.
Yeah.
Founder of Missional AI originally. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat.
Thanks. Appreciate it.